For all intents and purposes, the 2021 fantasy season has come to an end now that week 17 is officially over. I mean, I guess some of you guys could have some week 18 fantasy championships, in which case that sucks. Get that fixed. But for most of you out there, week 17 marks the end of the fantasy football season. So we're now about to basically dive into the 2022 Dynasty offseason. So this is going to be really, really fun. But before we get into anything for the offseason in terms of rookie content, free agents, all of that good stuff from the offseason, I want to take a look back on the 2021 season and specifically look at the rookies from the 2021 class, talk about their ADP from what we saw back in May, right after they were drafted in the NFL draft, to how some of that ADP and their values could have changed now in January of 2022 after all of their rookie seasons. So we at DLF actually just ran a rookie mock draft for the 2021 NFL class. And of course, players changed, some values are shook, and I would just want to talk about that in today's video. So let's get right into that video. So as I mentioned in the introduction, we at DLF redrafted the first two rounds of the 2021 rookie draft class to see what players actually rose, fell in value, all that good stuff, to see how their values were changing after their entire rookie year. So just as a reminder, this is what the draft class looked like in terms of ADP back in May, right after they were drafted in the NFL draft. So you can see this is just one quarterback, by the way. Najee Harris, Jamar Chase, Kyle Pitts, Travis Etienne, and Javonte Williams were your top 5 rookie players in ADP back in May. And then it kind of went on from there down to more of the wide receivers from this amazing wide receiver class. Some running backs, Michael Carter, Trey Sermon, guys like that. And then the quarterbacks, of course, fit in there too in terms of one of the most hyped up and powerful quarterback classes that we've seen over the last few years, going 5 deep potentially, is what we thought back in May. So now let's switch things up and see how things have changed, because of course a lot of these values are going to change and have changed over the last 5 or 6 months. So this is now what the new DLF ADP kind of looks like in terms of our 2-round rookie mock draft that we just ran among ourselves. So this is sorted basically in terms of players who lost the most value all the way down to gain the most value. So this is very, very interesting to discuss and talk about. And I just kind of color coordinated in terms of position for the players here. The first thing that we can kind of do is just talk about and then remove the players that went from -1 to 1 in terms of a difference. And that's players who either gained 1 spot or lost 1 spot of value or didn't even move at all. Guys like Najee Harris. Najee went from 1.01 to 1.02, so that's not really a change. Rashad Bateman, Rondale Moore, Devonta Smith, Trey Lance, Nico Collins, Jamar Chase, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. None of these guys really moved, and if they did, it was 1 spot in either direction. So not a whole lot changed in terms of their value with these guys. So those guys are really, really interesting, but we ultimately don't really need to discuss all that much about them because nothing really changed for them in how they're being viewed then and how they're being viewed now. So this is going to get more and more interesting here. Again, we can just kind of go from the middle, and these are the guys that gained or dropped within 2 spots. So Kyle Pitts was the 1.03 back in May and is now the 1.05 in January ADP. Same with Justin Fields. And then Javonte Williams, Michael Carter, and Kenneth Gainwell all gained 2 spots in ADP. Javonte Williams gaining the most from 1.05 to 1.03 as an awesome rookie season. He's now currently the RB14, so he's borderline an RB1 in his rookie season, sharing the backfield with Melvin Gordon. So that just bodes fantastic things for Javonte Williams, and of course probably all the things that you guys already know about Javonte. If you've been watching this channel or consuming Dynasty content at all, you know how fantastic Javonte Williams is. And then of course, Michael Carter, who is already a 1st-round pick back in May, the last 1st-round pick, the 112, gained 2 spots of value up to the 110. So that's just interesting there. I think that's just further confirmation of what we thought could happen with him being on the New York Jets as potentially the best running back on that team, even though he had to like compete with Tevin Coleman, Ty Johnson, all those guys. The expectation then back in May was that he would overtake that job as the best running back on the team out of talent and then be able to do things with that for fantasy football. And I think that his increase up to the 110 is just confirmation of what we thought, because we saw it. He had, a few games this year over the course of the year where he was fantastic. He was catching passes out of the backfield. He looked good running between the tackles at certain points in the year. So assuming that the New York Jets don't bring anybody else in terms of bigger free agents or another higher draft capital rookie next year, Michael Carter is probably in a really good spot to be a solid RB2 next year on this New York Jets team. We just need Zach Wilson to throw him the ball, and that would be really, really good for Michael Carter's fantasy value. And then Kenneth Gainwell, I just assumed that he gained value. That's just kind of where he was in May and where he just ended up falling in January with the Philadelphia Eagles. Nothing really there to talk about, but that's just kind of how it played out in this rookie draft. So we can clear these guys out and take away the plus or minus twos. So then we get into guys who really kind of significantly either dropped or gained value by upwards of half a round all the way to a round or more in value. So this is insane. Jalen Waddle, of course, the lowest value gain among all these guys remaining, went from the 1.07 to the 1.04. And, you know, he's only at this point behind Jamar Chase, Najee Harris, and Javonte Williams. And then it's Jalen Waddle right now as the fourth most valued rookie in this 2021 draft class. And honestly, that seems low to me. I understand it. Like, obviously he's behind Jamar Chase. I think obviously he's behind Najee Harris as well. But I don't know. It just seems weird that as fantastic of a season as he had as a wide receiver one is just insane that he is only the fourth best rookie in this class. And I love Jalen Waddle a lot. It seems low, but I definitely understand it. And that is where he should be ranked among this class at 1.04 now in January. And then you get into other guys. Elijah Moore gained a little bit of value just because we started to see it at the end of the year. We saw the handful of games that he had with Zach Wilson, without Zach Wilson, with Mike White, and he was starting to come on at the end of the year and unfortunately got busted by injury, hit the injured reserve. But good things, I think, are really going to be in Elijah Moore's future for 2022 and beyond. He's going to be a really hyped up rookie as a guy that we started to see, but then ultimately we didn't end up see the really strong finish to 2021. But good things are going to be coming for Elijah Moore in 2022. And then Kadarius Toney. This one was interesting to me because if you look at Kadarius Toney's game logs, he really just had like that 1 week or maybe 2 weeks where he was super fantastic. Remember that one game where he had like 10 receptions for 189 yards? That seems like a lifetime ago. That was back in like the end of September, beginning of October. So long ago. But then he really didn't do anything since. And it's not ultimately really his fault. I mean, I guess it kind of is. He was injured. But he was injured. But then whenever he would play, he was the guy. He was the wide receiver one for Daniel Jones or whoever was the quarterback then. It wasn't Kenny Golladay. It wasn't Sterling Shepard. It was Kadarius Toney. So this rise in value of him from the mid-second to the top of the second as a borderline first rounder now is really, really interesting. And I think just is kind of like Elijah Moore, but just we saw it, but then it didn't come to fruition at the end of the year. And he's going to be a hyped up wide receiver next year in his sophomore year as well. I don't know if I can buy into that price. It's going to be really interesting. Let me know how you guys feel about Kadarius Toney. Then just to kind of group a couple of these players together, Josh Palmer gained 8 picks of value going from the top of the third round all the way now into basically like the mid-second round here at the back end of the mid-second round. So that's a significant gain there. Ramondre Stevenson gained a lot of value as well, naturally. I mean, he's a running back. He had really, really good games whenever Damian Harris missed, and including this past week where he had 2 touchdowns in the championship week. I don't know if a lot of people played him just because Damian Harris was active, and he himself actually looked really, really good with 2 touchdowns in the first quarter until he left with his hamstring injury. But Ramondre Stevenson is going to be one of those guys that could potentially split snaps and carries with Damian Harris. But then if anything were to happen to Damian Harris, Ramondre Stevenson is the guy in that backfield as the pure runner and can also catch passes out of the backfield. He's a really strong handcuff, kind of more like a handcuff plus, because you might be able to play him in certain weeks, even when Damian Harris is there. So I definitely understand why his value just got bumped up so dramatically from the third round into now the mid to back of the second round. That's a big time value bump for this running back in Ramondre Stevenson. And if you drafted him in the third round, it's definitely paying off for you so far. The next guy here, Pat Freiermuth, obviously gained a lot as well. It was really, really interesting to me because I said all offseason that if this was not a class that had Kyle Pitts, we would talk about Pat Frymuth a lot more, and he would have been the tight end 1 in this draft class, but he just fell because he wasn't Kyle Pitts, and he was just more of a prototypical tight end. But he's looked fantastic for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and obviously the biggest question for them is who's their quarterback moving forward. But I think it's going to be pretty obvious that whoever that is going to need a safety blanket in Pat Frymuth, and he can just continue to be just a really solid tight end, getting 4 or 5 receptions per game, fall into the end zone every now and then, and it's just going to be really, really good for you as an above-tiered tight end that isn't necessarily touchdown dependent, but when he does catches those touchdowns because he's really good at it, it's going to be really, really good for you on a weekly basis with Pat Frymuth. And then, of course, the last player on this list, my boy, Elijah Mitchell, who is going from a 3rd round ADP, almost basically on the borderline of the 3rd and 4th round. So a lot of you guys probably got him in the 4th round as well in your leagues, but he is now a back end 1st rounder in this January ADP. And honestly, I'll admit, this was my pick. I took Elijah Mitchell at the 111. I took him ahead of Travis Etienne, and that honestly might still be a hot take right now, given how Elijah Mitchell has performed this year and how we didn't really see anything from Travis Etienne, but with the expectation for him as a 1st round running back is still there in the talent that Etienne possesses. But I would take Elijah Mitchell over Travis Etienne. I've seen Elijah Mitchell do it. I've not seen Travis Etienne do it. And then, of course, Travis Etienne is on the Jacksonville Jaguars. That team still sucks, even post Urban Meyer. But what I love about Elijah Mitchell is that when he is on the field, when he's healthy, he is the guy. He's Kyle Shanahan's dude. They love him. They absolutely adore everything that Elijah Mitchell can do for them out of the backfield in terms of running between the tackles, catching a couple passes a game. He is their starting running back, and I think that as long as he's healthy, that job is his, and he's not going to lose it. It's not Trey Sermon. It's not Raheem Mostert when he comes back. It's not Jeff Wilson. It's not any of those guys. It is Elijah Mitchell, and that's why I love drafting him at the back end of the 1st round in this rookie mock draft of January for this 2021 class. But enough about Elijah Mitchell. I could go on and on about him and how much of a hit he was as my favorite late round darling all offseason last year. But enough about him. Let's move into the guys that lost value. We can start with Amari Rodgers, Dyami Brown. These 2 wide receivers were just guys that we thought could do something as late day 2 or early day 3 draft picks on the Green Bay Packers and the Washington football team. None of these guys really did anything. I thought they were just kind of weird picks in there as just hopefuls. You were hoping that Amari Rodgers could take the wide receiver 2 spot in Green Bay. You were hopeful that Dyami Brown could potentially take the wide receiver 3 or maybe even the wide receiver 2 spot if he got ahead of Curtis Samuel. Neither one of those 2 things happened, so they both fell out of the 2nd round in January ADP and are now both 3rd rounders here in January. Then we hit the quarterbacks here, Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson actually fell all the way out of the 2nd round. He's now a 3rd rounder as well, just because it was Zach Wilson. He did not look good at all. He started to look good over the past couple of weeks, but just the whole entire season just did not look good for Zach Wilson. And honestly, Trevor Lawrence didn't really look any better. Trevor Lawrence threw more interceptions than Zach Wilson. I mean, they were basically super close in terms of passing touchdowns. Like, Trevor Lawrence just threw his 10th passing touchdown this past week, 10th or 11th. That's insane to go basically a whole entire 16, 17 game season and just barely make it to 10 passing touchdowns. Trevor Lawrence, man, come on. We need a little bit more here, and that's why you lost a lot of value going from the back end of the 1st to now the mid-2nd here, 16th overall at 2.04. And honestly, I'm not even sure if that's low enough. I would be really, really confident in saying that I think Trevor Lawrence could tank a little bit more and go down into the 2nd round, especially in 1 quarterback leagues, because you're not playing him. And the biggest problem with Trevor Lawrence is that that team in general has so many problems, starting with the head coach and coaching staff, and then going all the way down to the offense in terms of they need more wide receivers. Both of their running backs got hurt, an Achilles injury for James Robinson and a Liz Frank injury for Travis Etienne. Their offensive line sucks. Their defense is probably the best part of the team, but even that is still middle of the pack at best, downwards to below average. This whole entire team is awful. And the problem is they can't fix all of that in 1 year or even really 2 years. Like 1 year, they might be able to get a coach. They might be able to get somebody to come in and just be, solid for them. Even Bill O'Brien, maybe not, but just somebody who can come in and just be good enough and stable for Trevor Lawrence to get kind of his footing in the NFL. But then the next year, maybe then they fix the wide receiver room, right? They can get an extra wide receiver. They can pay it for a free agent. They draft Treylon Burks or some other wide receiver this year or next year. Maybe that ends up happening. But then you still have the offensive line. And if Trevor Lawrence can't throw behind a really bad offensive line, that's still not working. So we're talking about 2023, 2024, before Trevor Lawrence actually gets like going for fantasy football. And that's helping nobody, especially at the draft cost that it took to acquire him this past year and the value that he still has in name value this year, despite basically not doing anything. My fear is that he's just Sam Darnold, and we are just seeing the beginnings of another Sam Darnold in Jacksonville as another high upside potential quarterback who just kind of got fleeced by not being able to get his foot, in the door in the NFL and get going because his team sucked and the situation that he fell into sucked. So that's just where we're at with Trevor Lawrence. And honestly, I don't think I'm touching him at all for the remainder of 2022 until I actually see him start doing something, because we didn't see him do anything. There are no bright spots in 2021. There are bright spots for Mac Jones, bright spots for Lance, for Fields, even a little bit of Zach Wilson. There was nothing for Trevor Lawrence, and that scares me a whole lot. So then after the quarterbacks, we get into the running backs. We get to Trey Sermon and Travis Etienne, two of the biggest fallers from May ADP down to January ADP. Travis Etienne being taken at the 1.04, now barely a first rounder in January. And again, like I said, I would take Elijah Mitchell over Travis Etienne like I did in this draft. I did draft Elijah Mitchell over Etienne, and that's just because I haven't seen it. And kind of everything that I talked about with Trevor Lawrence for this team applies to Travis Etienne as well. Like if that offensive line is not good, there aren't any wide receivers, then defenses can just kind of stack the box on Travis Etienne and force the Jaguars to beat them with Trevor Lawrence, which hasn't happened at all basically this year. So I'm really nervous about Travis Etienne. I think that he can offer some PPR value, especially with the connection that Trevor Lawrence has with Travis Etienne, especially from what we saw their senior year at Clemson, where Travis Etienne had like 40 or 50 receptions at Clemson. I think some of that can transfer to the NFL and make Travis Etienne solid from a PPR standpoint. I just don't know if that's enough. And I don't think there's going to be really a lot of touchdowns coming his way. It's just, it's super scary. And I understand why his price has dropped so far. It's going to get to the point where honestly, he might become a value here in a couple months because we're going to be talking him down so much. But Travis Etienne, man, the potential and the hype is still kind of there, but it's just so rough. That whole Jaguars team is so rough. But then not as rough as Trey Sermon. Holy crap. Went from the 2.02 in May ADP, not even being drafted in our first 2 rounds. He's now a 3rd rounder. I would even argue that he would not even be a high 3rd rounder, maybe down into the low 3rd, if not a 4th round pick for Trey Sermon, as a guy who was just so much expectations for him as the day 2 pick for the Niners. And nobody wanted to listen to me. Nobody thought that Elijah Mitchell was better than Trey Sermon, I guess, except for me. And sorry, I just keep tooting my own horn with Elijah Mitchell there. But yeah, Trey Sermon's an afterthought. I mean, he had his opportunities, and whenever Elijah Mitchell came back, those opportunities went right back to Elijah Mitchell. Trey Sermon is not a factor on this team. He's buried on the depth chart. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they bring back Raheem Mostert. I wouldn't be surprised if Mostert is ahead of Trey Sermon as well next year. He's so buried. He just got Keyshawn Vaughn so hard that, hold on to him for sure. Dropping him would feel really, really bad, especially for the price that you paid for him back in May. I don't know if I could drop Trey Sermon. And if I saw Trey Sermon on the waiver wire, I would probably pick him up just because he's a running back and somebody who could potentially do something in the future. But man, there is not a lot of hope for Trey Sermon moving forward. And you're not going to get anything in terms of trade value. And you just got to hold and just hope that something happens. Hope that Elijah Mitchell gets hurt and Trey Sermon gets another opportunity. Just hope Trey Sermon can do something, The biggest one, Terrace Marshall here, going from the back end of the first round. He was being drafted at the 110 back in May. to now being the 212 in our January mock draft, dropping 14 spots. And that's just because he didn't do anything. Like, he literally did not do anything. I don't even think he has 150 receiving yards all year. He was a healthy scratch in a handful of games, it felt like, this year, at least a couple. And that is not good, especially on a Carolina Panthers team where it seemed like the door was kind of open for him to take over that wide receiver 2 spot over Robbie Anderson. Of course, he wasn't going to beat out DJ Moore because DJ Moore is super talented and very good, but he could have potentially beat out Robbie Anderson, and that just did not happen at all. And so Terrace Marshall dropped a lot of value. Actually, I'm going to be planning out another video here talking about rookies, specifically wide receivers, who face plant in year 1 are not good investments. And I think Terrace Marshall is going to be the poster boy of that in this year after an abysmal just rookie year. Just didn't do anything and just falling super hard from his expectations back in May to now where he's at the back end of the second at the 212. That sucks for Terrace Marshall, but that's where we are right now, and that is where we're at with this 2021 rookie class. I have all these other players here. These are the other players who were drafted in May ADP in the 3rd and 4th rounds who weren't drafted at all in our January ADP. We only did 2 rounds, so none of these guys really got the chance to be drafted. But just a kind of look at some of the other players who were drafted back in May, and none of their values really changed enough to be drafted now. Outside of maybe Chuba Hubbard. Chuba was interesting, but he had opportunity, didn't do a whole lot with his opportunity for Christian McCaffrey, but he's still a solid handcuff, and would definitely be drafted there, probably like the next pick at 3.01 or 3.02 if we had kept going. But that is at least how this draft class has shaken out in terms of where they were being valued in May to where they're being valued now in January, and that difference in value here. So poor Terrace Marshall, Trey Sermon, Travis Etienne. If you hit on Ramondre Stevenson, Pat Freiermuth, and Elijah Mitchell, it's looking really good for you guys. And then, of course, all the other players who just didn't really move a whole lot, but are still fantastic. Like, man, Jamar Chase, Najee Harris is looking really good too. Jalen Waddle, Javonte Williams, all that fantastic stuff. So that is a redrafting of the 2021 rookie draft class. Let me know down in the comments how you guys viewed this draft class now. If you guys had any regrets from players that you drafted early back in May, if you are celebrating like me on Elijah Mitchell or any other rookies that you hit on late who are looking like really, really good values for you guys as key pieces to your Dynasty roster, let me know all that stuff down in the comment section. And if you would like to hear about my biggest Dynasty mistake that I've ever made, I made it twice. I repeated it in 2021. So learn from my mistake. And if you want to watch that video, you can click right up here and watch that. And with that all being said, guys, thank you all so much for watching. We'll catch y'all later.